All right, everyone. We just recorded with Spike Cohen. He's the Libertarian Party candidate
for vice president.
It's cool, dude. But because of timeline, so we're going to do our pre-show now. So welcome to the show, everyone. And we're going to do our drink testing and shoot the breeze about what we think about it. Now, both of us, our political opinions are different, which is cool. We need to get a Democrat or a more progressive person in here to round us out, because I understand that I'm radical and I sit outside the box, way outside the box.
And I'm normal. I'm absolutely pure normal.
Pure normal. Yes. But anyway, so tonight we're trying out underground handcrafted herbal spirit. It's from Ogden. It says it has ginseng and guarana.
So it's healthy for you.
Yeah.
It's got vitamin C.
I'm sure it'll do the same thing that all them elk horns that the Chinese grind up will do. I'll be walking around like just choked on a Viagra. Anyhow, so we chatted with Spike. I like the conversation. I like the dude. He's easygoing. He's cool. He didn't cringe when I made my foul jokes that I normally make. Dave is probably wondering why he partnered up with me for such a mission as talking politics, but he did. But it was a good conversation. He's a cool dude.
I feel more comfortable with this election than last Libertarian candidates. Gary Johnson, I don't know. He didn't make me feel comfortable enough to say, hey, you want to be my leader? These two candidates, I would say, if Trump doesn't win and they did, I would not cry. Not a tear.
No, I wouldn't cry at all. Though I imagine Captain Dementia's presidency would be fucking exciting. But anyways, for our Democrat and Republican viewers out there, we do, we're not trying to, come down hard on it, but let's face it. We've given the Democrats and the Republicans the reins for a long time, and it seems like they failed a lot, right? I mean, is there a success anywhere?
I'm searching my database. War, lots of war, lots of debt, lots of QE 3, 4, and 5. Let's see, the police brutality all the time because someone's smoking marijuana, or a lot of dead dogs getting shot.
Okay, go on.
Let me think.
The success.
I know the riots have been like therapeutic for a lot of people, I think.
But is it a success? And the riots, I would count as a negative towards both those parties, because both of them, I think, have their hand to play in stoking that. You can't take an inner city and leave it destitute forever and then throw in a whole bunch of regulations for them to have some kind of startup. And we talked about it on the show for those of you who did listen. But yeah. Oh, okay. Corey's on there. Boobies. All right. We all love him. But anyways, he's talking about the underground. He says it tastes like Jägermeister. So we'll go ahead and shoot that right now. Corey, how you doing tonight?
All right, Corey, this one's for you, buddy.
Yes, sir.
Cheers, mate.
Oh, it does. Does taste kind of like Jaeger, but it has a substantial burn there at the end. Wow.
It's kind of like a black Zambuca.
Yeah.
But with vitamin C, right?
Yeah. Anyways, not bad.
All right.
I dig it. It's a Utah number, so that's cool. Anyway, so yeah, we chat with him. He's got a pretty general libertarian message, which is good. The party itself has a good message about making government smaller and hopefully they can actually do it. Now, one question I didn't ask, and one I want to ask everybody running, just send this out into the ether. Why do you want to win the presidency now? Because I don't know if with the debt we have, if there's any kind of recoverability on the horizon. I'm wondering if there's a default, and would I want to be in the history books as the presider over said default?
The first libertarian president gets in the office and has to default on all the debt because it's impossible.
Granted, thinking people will take a minute to look back, people with maybe an extra 20 minutes of their time to dig in deep on where stuff was, but the average person is going to just lay it all on you. Just, I just wonder about that, but I still wish him the best. And I think it'd be a severe step forward to crawl our way out of the drug war, to crawl our way out of some of the judicial system issues that we have going on.
You'll have more money in your pocket with a libertarian candidacy.
Even if you don't have more money, you won't have as many guns pointed at you. Let's just put it like that.
Well, you'll have your guns,
but they don't point at me.
But you'll have them. I mean,
you'll have your guns.
These guys are serious about their gun rights. If you are a serious gun rights person, you really should consider the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, you two-way guys. Let's just put it like this. Of the recent gun laws, you've got Reagan's law that was started in California when he was governor of California, that big one. That's a Republican. He was a Republican then. And then you've got the bump stock ban, the most recent gun regulation that come through. And you got to remember, the NRA has supported every one of these gun laws. So, I'm a GOA guy. I'm not an NRA guy. I'm not a fan.
What's GOA?
Gun Owners of America.
We'll have to plug those guys.
Yeah.
Because I need someone to support it. It ain't going to be the NRA.
Yeah, the NRA supports all the gun bans. They've got kind of a shady history, but and if you're a minority or whatever else, you've got to remember these gun laws almost every time were written for you,
especially black people. Black people, you have been in the crosshairs, and you still are. You don't even know it.
Yeah, so it's time to. Time to get rid of that.
I went to that Black Lives Matters march and here in Tooele. And the Democratic Party is like standing up like, oh, yeah, we're buddy with you guys. And it just bothers me so much that there's not a larger black population in the Libertarian Party because you want your freedoms. You don't want to be harassed about having your freedoms. It ain't going to be the Democrats. It ain't going to be the Republicans.
Let's ask, the black, any minority that's living in a Democrat city, how are you doing? That's all you got to ask them. How are you doing? Have they released you financially onto the world? Are you economically thriving? Are you exploding in any kind of financial system?
I think we should do another one.
That's the question you've got to ask. How are you doing? So, I agree. When Trump came out and said, what do you have to lose? They got nothing to lose. Nothing. Because
nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Yeah, in those Democrat cities,
you just got to think about that.
You're not doing good, and that's because Democrats like to have big unions, big government, and all that. And I'll say it before, I'll say it again. Governments produce negative effects. They're never a good thing. Government, and it doesn't matter what party, the government is dog shit. That's it.
Let's look at Tooele trying to produce businesses through its government. How did that work out? We have that racetrack. It's
killing it, right? It's killing it. But let's cut this short so we can get right on to Spike, because I'm sure when we do convert this into podcast, no one wants to listen to us prattle on. But stick around for Spike. A couple of good funnies in there for me, and we talk about dog shit and apes and whatever. And Just to be clear, I'm the ape. But thanks for joining us, and enjoy the show.
People are listening to me say this right now. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. So I will share this right now.
We like to shoot from the hip on this.
Yeah, no, this is how I like it to start this way.
No guy.
Yeah.
It's no problem. So I'm just sharing it so everyone else can see it as well.
All right. And we're going to ask you a few questions, and if anybody else jumps in and has some questions, we'll push those on to you as well.
That's perfect. Yeah, feel free, even though I'm not looking at you yet because I'm sharing it. Feel free to start asking questions because I'm totally listening to you.
All right. Well, I got one. I want to start off with an easy one. Now,
Okay.
I read you came in with Vermin Supreme.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know the man personally?
Well, I came to know him personally in the months before we did the campaigning, and we came to be friends. And then he asked me to be his running mate, or his proposed running mate for the nomination contest for the Libertarian Party.
Nice. Now, I've followed Vermin for it's got to be 10 years now, maybe a little longer, and I like the guy. I like that. You know, there's a comedic side to him, and that I like. But I don't know. He just seems like he'd be the funnest president.
Oh, I mean, it's hard to dispute that. I mean, the thing is, Vermin has found an incredibly effective way to bring in people to libertarianism who have no desire to talk to politicians or don't want to hear anything political at all, especially not from a politician. If I show up and I go, hey, I'm Spike Cohen and I'd like to talk to you about radical self-ownership and that's the solution to it, they don't want to hear anything. They've been lied to so much by politicians. They've been so left behind by the system. They're so disgusted with the level of political discourse in this country. They don't want to hear anything. They don't want to hear anything. But you can entertain them. They want to be entertained. And if you can reach them through entertainment, which is why, increasingly people get their news from, the Daily Show and late night news program, late night talk show programs and other comedic ways of reaching people and entertaining ways of reaching people with a serious subject matter. That's why they go to people like that. Someone like Vermin can entertain them, lower their cognitive defenses because they don't feel like they're being attacked or they're being pandered to or lied to. And so they are entertained. They hear that there's an underlying political message there. Over time, they get more and more interested. What's this really all about? And then that's when you can hit them with the actual message of liberty. So we're very grateful that Vermin has brought so many people to the liberty movement. And we are grateful that Vermin is helping with Joe and my campaign. We are running on a campaign to address what the Republicans and Democrats and their major media cronies have done to the level of political discourse that it has become such a joke that it is. And we want to change that. We want to take away where the Republicans and Democrats have had exclusive control of every lever of power in the federal government for over 160 years and have wrought upon us every single bad policy that has led to the inequitable and harmful and abusive outcomes that Americans are facing every single day, and how common sense libertarian solutions are the solution to be able to fix those problems.
Oh yeah. Well, to me, the Republican and Democrats is like, we curse on this show, so I'm going to lead off.
That's okay. Yeah, no, that's fine.
So if you got two dog shits out in the front yard and one's old crusty and sun-dried and the other one's fresh, there you go.
There you go. And the beauty of that is you didn't say which was which, because it's hard to tell.
Which, I mean, they're both going to taste the same, I'm sure.
Exactly. That's the point.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
But we want to ask you a few questions. Dave's got a couple for you real quick, and then I'll follow up with some more.
Awesome, man. I look forward to it.
So Spike, I remember watching a libertarian debate.
Mm-hmm.
In that debate, they referred to a document that the Libertarian Party signed off on, where they would recognize the Free Republic of Liberland. Are you familiar with the subject?
Vaguely, yes. I know briefly about Liberland. I'm not an expert on it, but I do remember something about this. Yeah.
So I guess like the question would go something like this: if there's a way to make a new country in the world, what would it possibly entail to require the U.S.'s acknowledgement if you guys had executive control of the White House. And
I think, oh, go ahead.
go ahead. We'll start off with that.
So I think any, and I would have to defer to Joe, obviously, on a question of the White House or the U.S. government recognizing a new foreign country. I would say my guess is, I would assume, based on what I know about Joe, that what she would want to see in that country is a net increase in the freedom and the liberty of the people within that region. That it didn't break away in order to enslave a population. It didn't break away in order to commit genocide or declare war against others, or to in some other way infringe upon the lives and rights of the people both inside and outside of the jurisdiction of this new country or government. That it would be the opposite, that they would be pulling away in order to more greatly expand upon the freedoms and acknowledge and affirm the freedoms and liberties and self-ownership of the people within it, which again, as we know, would lead to better outcomes for them, freer and safer and healthier and more prosperous, more thriving options than they would have otherwise. But again, I on a case-by-case basis, I would defer to the president on that. I would defer to Joe on that.
Well, we'll do a quick deal on Liberland. Is it's unoccupied land that it's between Croatia and
Serbia.
Croatia and Serbia, right? Yeah.
Nobody wants it, and so it's a Croatian politician kind of set it up, right? Or
No, it was
Serbian?
Actually someone from Prague, but
Okay,
the land itself.
But yeah, we don't want to
out of the dispute zone.
Yeah, we don't want to give the class on, but I think hopefully what Liberland is ultimately looking for is just more kind of signatories to support them.
But there's a lot of countries out there like Somaliland and other countries like that seem to provide more liberties to their citizens. Yet it's weird that our country won't recognize them because of, I have no idea why. I mean, you'd think, yeah, the Libertarian Party is all about freedom. Well, America is supposed to be about providing freedom. And when these countries pop up and they provide evidence that they are providing,
I would like to
freedom,
see evidence that the United States have been about providing.
I was just gonna say I'm waiting for that evidence domestically first, but go ahead.
Yeah, just I mean, maybe we could point out some random accident somewhere, but
random freedom accidents. I like that.
The president at that time's going, "Oh man, I missed that up.
I missed an opportunity to screw everyone over." Yeah. So, I mean, the short answer is, if you look at what the founders intended, and I'm not someone who necessarily co-signs every single thing that the founders did. They were imperfect people, but I think largely they understood on big issues certain things. And so, for example, they warned against entangling alliances. They warned against this idea of creating one treaty and one treaty organization and one thing after the next that puts us in this ever growing web of, well, we have a treaty with this person and we have a sort of a mutual bilateral agreement with this person and this country, but then we have this trilateral agreement with these two, and these two don't like each other, and it leads to what we have now. It led to World War I. It eventually, which then World War II was basically the ending of World War I, which then led to the Cold War. We see it now in Syria, where we are often, where the U.S. military is often bombing targets that are the allies of our allies, because they're also the enemy of our ally, who is the ally of this enemy. And it's like, it's this absurd thing where it's like a 52 person game of chess where the pieces, no one even knows where what pieces on the board they're supposed to go to, so they all just start shooting each other, and that's what that's what we're facing, and it doesn't help anything. I think that in general, the best thing that we should have is, and I forget who coined this term, trade with all, peace with all, war with none against except those who are immediately aggressing upon us. And with the exception of that, freedom and trade with all, and alliances, permanent alliances with no one, because that doesn't help things. Permanent alliances that are based on a political consideration from people who now have been dead for however long, however many decades after they imposed these alliances, we're now staying allied and having to get involved. With NATO, if any of the countries in NATO gets attacked, every other NATO member is bound to defend them.
And did they ever think, what if one NATO country attacks another?
Exactly. What if one of those NATO countries attacks another and gets attacked back? Like, oh, I don't know, the US every time that they do something. But let's say, for example, Turkey decides they want to restart the Armenian genocide and Armenia attacks them. Now what?
Yeah, we just sit there. I'd rather let Chevy and Microsoft set up trade deals. And the government just says, yeah, that looks fair.
Yeah. And better yet, let us set up trade deals. Let the people make decisions about who they want to associate and trade and host and hire and house without the government getting involved in it. The government has no business doing that. That's not what the government was set up for. The stated purpose of the government was to protect and affirm the lives and the rights and the freedoms of the people. And that was it. All of this other stuff was not intended. And it's led to bad outcomes because central planning of things that are best handled by the market, by people set free to associate and to innovate and to thrive and to nurture and to help and to compete with one another is going to be much better than a bunch of pandering, craven politicians who are exempt from any responsibility for their actions, being spoon-fed legislation and campaign war chest funding by well-heeled cronies, a very relative handful of people who own almost all of the wealth in this country. That is what we have now, and it's not working.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, our government has drifted far from the initial design of it. Now,
it's a chia pet. It started small. It just keeps growing. And
no one trimmed it.
Like, what's that?
No one ever trimmed it.
Well, you can't. It's illegal to trim it. So the people who've tried trimming it, they end up in either in jail, or if they try to run to trim it, they've had varying levels of success. We're running to trim the chia pet all the way down, and then to this analogy is starting to break down. But putting something in there to stop the chia pet. Really, I should have just stopped with trimming it down.
Well, okay, that leads into another question. All right, I am an anarchist.
Okay.
I'm a ANCAP.
Okay.
Rothbardian style ANCAP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rothbard, von Mises, all that. Yeah.
I've lost faith in governments providing value, and I think if the government came out and said, they always do the opposite of what they said. So if they came out and said, we're going to kill every human on earth, I would vote for that government, because I know that goddamn government would make humanity thrive, because they failed.
If they had a war on humans, then humans would thrive. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. The government, it's just ultimate failure. Just look to the government. They've never.
Right.
But the chia pet analogy leads me into my major question. I was listening to a podcast you did a couple days ago. Mm-hmm. On the 19th, I believe, Juneteenth.
Okay.
And you were talking about that guy down in Atlanta, the DUI stop at the Wendy's, and
Rayshard Brooks, I think his name is.
Rayshard Brooks. And granted, I come from the conservative end of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. So you're saying, well, what if they, tow the car and everything else? And at first, like you mentioned yourself, you get the conservative old bones and you start spurting up, and
yep.
You're freaking out for a minute, like you can't do that. Punishment. But then I got to thinking about it. Imagine how much cheaper the fines would be if you just said, look, you were DUI, so here's $100 fine, because you don't have to have that fine pay for a jail or anything else.
Exactly.
It can be a simple fine that says, you know what, this is a simple fine. And we should thank you, because now, we get to buy that soda machine for the lunch ladies in the school or whatever.
Yeah. Or even just tow the car and make them pay for it. Like,
have a fine be, the police give you a ride home like an Uber, it costs $100.
That's fair too. Yeah. Any of that stuff is going to go far better than making their life harder moving forward, which is going to lead to more addiction and more, other problems that lead to drunk driving in the first place.
Yeah. And I'd like to extend that out. I want to do away with, I've wanted this forever, even back in my conservative days.
Yeah.
because of a family member I had. I want to redo our felony system.
Yeah.
I don't want a felon to get out of jail, get out of serving his time or whatever, and then still have that felony chase him around to where he has to then look for a job, where he might be able to wash dishes at a rundown, place. I want that felony to be wiped. I want him to enter and be able to be prosperous, because we're seeing recidivism from that.
Exactly.
Horrible. They can't get a real job. So what are they going to do? Well, I know how to make meth. Okay. I can make money doing that. So I want to see that redone also.
Yeah. And by the way, that's intentional. The recidivism rate we have that is through this ridiculous parole for the rest of your life system that we have is intentional, because most states have a quota of a minimum number of the people residing in their states that have to be in their prisons at any given time. They actually have a minimum number of people that have to be in prison, which means criminal justice reform is nearly impossible, because they don't want criminal justice reform. They want a maximum number of people in the prison for no other. And here's why. Because you're probably thinking, what would that have to do with public safety? It doesn't. They have contracts with for-profit prison labor contractors who are making so much money, tens of billions of dollars a year, that they're actually listed on the stock market. And they have these agreements that they have to pay fees to these companies if they don't keep a certain number of people in. So they actually have a vested, perverse incentive to keep people in jail, and when they get out, to try as fast as possible to get them back into prison, which helps no one. It destroys families. It destroys the lives of countless people. It absolutely destroys things. What you're describing is a greater part of what's called restorative justice. The idea that justice should be based on making the victim whole. First of all, not putting people in jail for crimes that don't have victims.
Yeah.
Second of all,
none of that.
None of that. And second of all, if it has a victim, then determine very quickly, is the best way forward to make this victim whole, make the aggressor, the person who committed the crime, make this victim whole as best as possible, so that both the victim and the transgressor are able to learn. The transgressor is able to learn from this and go on to thrive and never do that again. And the victim is actually made whole so they can live a better life as well. And if
we have a fine where, okay, you have to pay the victim back the $100 you stole, and there's a $50 surcharge on it.
And there's a charge as a punishment. Yeah, exactly.
So the victim comes out going, okay, this was terrible, whatever. But on to the actual question, because,
Sure.
our justice system makes my spidey sense tingle. It's creepy and gross. But what power does the executive branch or just the executive itself have to deal with that?
So what you have is, as you, I'm certain, know, we have a situation where Congress has been slowly abdicating their responsibility to the executive branch. Every single time they make another alphabet soup agency, like another set of alphabety boys, and they give them nearly unlimited regulatory authority, which basically gives them the authority to do de facto legislation, because the Congress made a law saying they could do whatever they want at their discretion, basically, for the most part. And and this was just reaffirmed in a Supreme Court case regarding the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the president can hire and fire as he sees fit, or as he or she sees fit. That's the beauty of what will happen when Joe Jorgensen is president.
Shut down agencies. I would say, my druthers would be DEA's gone first, then ATF. IRS is in that gray zone.
IRS is absolutely going away.
Have to be done with dynamite. Can it be done with dynamite? Sorry, that was a bad.
Well, once we get rid of the BATF, then there's less regulations on dynamite. No, we're not going to kill people. But no, if any buildings are being demolished, it will be long after everyone has been safely evacuated from them. But no, we're not destroying buildings. But so a lot can be done both in the ending of entire agencies by simply firing everyone and refusing to rehire, which she has every constitutional authority to do, and also in rolling back all those regulations and all those executive orders. And then in doing so, the American people will see the immediate and profound benefit of being set free, of having the power taken out of the hands of the cronies and the politicians and the bureaucrats and the central planners and being put back in their hands where it belongs, how they will be able to thrive and be nurtured from that. And as a result of that, the massive benefits that they and their loved ones and their communities will reap as a result. And then based on the strength of that, we will then be able to go to Congress with a very with the wind at our sails, saying, hey, look at everything that's happening because of the great stuff we're doing. And then that will allow us to use the bully pulpit of the White House to draw a very clear line in the sand. And on the one side of that line is Joe and I and everyone working in Congress with us to remove that boot, the boot from the neck of the people, as they so that they can thrive and have the impositions taken away and the power put back in their hands so that they can live the best life possible. And on the other side of that line are the people in Congress who would be continuing to fight to keep that boot on the neck of the people and to allow continued needless harm and damage for no other reason than to preserve their own wealth and power and influence and that of their favorite cronies.
What's your thoughts on the 10th Amendment?
The 10th Amendment's clear. If something is not explicitly given as a power, explicitly noted as a power granted to the federal government, then it is best left to the states or preferably the people. And that was supposed to be the most powerful part of the Bill of Rights. And yet it has been completely ignored because in the 1880s, in order to pass the Chinese Exclusion Acts, which was the first of a series of the first time that the federal government was restricting migration, a Democrat-packed Supreme Court decided that they were going to find an end run around the 10th Amendment by using a very skewed definition of the term commerce in order to invoke the Commerce Clause. Well, people are kind of sort of like commerce if you think about it. So I guess, yeah, you can totally restrict that, even though it says nothing in the Constitution about restricting migration or immigration or anything else. And that has led to an ever-growing number of times that the Commerce Clause has been completely skewed. So all of the gun control laws, all of the drug laws, Obamacare and the Obamacare mandates, so many other abusive and harmful, pretty much every bad unconstitutional bill that has been deemed unconstitutional, the vast majority of them, commerce has been worked somewhere in there in one way or another using the precedent that started with migration control. And so no, the 10th Amendment is very clear. The federal government has very clear and enumerated powers, and if it is not listed in that, they have no business doing it. It should be left to the individual states, which is the whole purpose of having a federal system, or even better, allowed to the individual to determine for themselves in a market and a people that are set free.
Well, and then so you honor the 10th Amendment. Then if a state wants to continue on with this ravenous, judicial system, they can do that.
They can do it.
Go ahead, and they can suffer the consequences.
Now, I will say this. Yes, they can do it to the extent that it doesn't violate our constitutional rights. And that's a key thing here, because right now, everything has been turned on its head where it should not be. The Department of Justice has been turned into a department that is basically the conduit for trickle-down militarization of the police state in every single one of the states. And that's not what it's supposed to be. The purpose of the Department of Justice is to defend and affirm and protect and go against anyone who would transgress against the rights and properties and liberties and lives of the American people.
Supposed to be a Department of Justice. I don't see that written in the Constitution anywhere.
Well, so and there is some, I believe in the Article 2 that there's something in there. But the bottom line is that anything that comes from the federal government would have to be affirming the lives and rights and properties of the American people as set forth in the Bill of Rights. Yeah. So if there is to be a federal government, the only purpose set forth is precisely to be protecting those rights. So if a state, for example, goes too far, if a state goes, okay, we have decided to imprison anyone named Larry.
Now that's the 14th Amendment, right? The 14th presses the Bill of Rights onto the states. So the states have to honor the Bill of Rights, or they have to honor what's written in the Constitution. That's
my understanding is that so the 14th Amendment was very clear that this I think it was a reaffirmation of what's in the first 7 articles, which is that the purpose of the U.S. government is to enforce basically to enforce the laws set forth. Federal law always has primacy, and so if federal law says, for example, that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, that means by anyone. If it says that the right of the people to, the freedom of speech and the freedom of peaceful assembly shall not be infringed and shall be protected, then that means against it from anyone. So that is the situation where the federal government's entire purpose is to keep commerce, to deal with the foreign relations with other foreign governments, to allow for commerce between the states, what they call regulated commerce, which it didn't mean what we mean now. Regulated back then meant allowed to be very robust. It did not mean like controlled, like how we use regulated now. Yeah, it didn't mean like controlled. It meant regulated, like allowed to be regular, basically.
Yeah.
And then to affirm and protect and defend the rights and the lives and the properties of the American people. So if a state were to go too far and say, we're going to commit genocide or we're going to enslave an entire people or something like that, it is just for the federal government to step in and stop that from happening.
Well, what if the states want to charge me $1,000 for a gun permit? I mean,
that's an infringement.
Would that go away?
Yeah, no, that's an infringement. If you are putting especially a very high cost burden, but if you are putting a financial burden on the ability to exercise your right, they are saying you don't have this right until you give us this money, which means they're not affirming it as a right. A right doesn't require you to pay someone for it. So so that's a perfect example. And that's what we have said. It shall not be infringed was not a suggestion, and it was not limited to the federal government. And any of the bad court decisions that have said that, oh, well, if they say you got to get a permit first, and they say that they probably won't give you a permit unless there's extenuating circumstances that say you need it, that's not really an infringement. They're just licensing it. Of course it's an infringement. Anything that is short of, you want to buy a gun? Okay, go somewhere and they can, and pay whatever the person who's making it wants to sell it for, is an infringement. That is a market action. Going and purchasing a gun or making one for yourself is none of the federal government's business or any other government or any other entity.
It makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside to hear this. It really does.
Yeah. So you're in Baltimore, right?
No, I was born in Baltimore, but I live in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I've been here since I was a child.
So you probably do own firearms then. I've been to Baltimore and Maryland, and
don't confess.
I did until that tragic day at sea.
Yeah, that's what happened to all mine. It's shocking that little boat held all 40 something.
We rarely talk about the environmental tragedy in this country, where the average lake in this country is only 20% H2O and 80% AR-15.
Why don't they teach us in elementary school not to go fishing with all our firearms?
All of them on us, and not even strapped to us, just laying there. So at the very second the boat rocks, they all fall off. It's a human tragedy, and it's a failure. It's an indictment of our public education system.
Really,
I agree 100%.
It is. And so we need to. I think that should be your second maneuver. Teach that in school.
Teach gun boat safety in school. Yes, absolutely. I have a feeling that once Joe Jorgensen is in office and those gun laws have been removed, suddenly a lot of people are going to be reunited with those guns that they thought they'd never see again.
We'll have to do a mass singing of that "Reunited Feels So Good" song. Us like kind of in a hazy mist, hugging our ARs, and
so
I like it. Yeah, I like it.
When we talk about reuniting and things like that,
mm-hmm.
I think of the border policy right now, and I'm thinking I didn't quite feel comfortable with the previous Libertarian presidential candidate's border policy, open borders.
Okay.
I don't think he knew what was going on anyway.
Can you give me a down low of what your policies would be on the border?
So our policy is to reopen America to what the founders intended, which is all of the trade and migration that we as individuals wish to have. The founders were very clear in the signing of the Declaration of Independence. One of the items that they give as a reason why they are declaring independence and starting a war against the British Crown to create a new country free from the British Crown was because King George was restricting migration into the colonies and restricting trade as well. In the Constitution, again, we were talking about the 10th Amendment. There is no mention of migration control in there anywhere. In fact, Article 1, Section 9 specifically says that there will be no restriction on the importation or migration of such people. And again, with the 10th Amendment, it says that is best left to the states or preferably the people, which is why for the first 100 years of this nation's existence, there was no restrictions or regulations on migration. They recognize that the purpose of borders is twofold. Number one, it draws a line and says this is our presumed our region that we exert our jurisdiction and authority within. And then number two, it's a line saying, okay, here is a line, and if you are a foreign military, you can't cross this line or that's an act of war. And if you start to build yourself up along that line, we're going to have some troubles. But short of that, that is the purpose of a border. A border was never meant to tell people that they can't come into this country, this free country, we are told, unless they have their government papers, and that we ourselves are not allowed to host and hire and house whomever we wish on our private properties or to travel to properties where we are welcome. That is a massive infringement upon our rights. And in fact, the police state that has had to be created, the police and surveillance state that has had to be created to try in vain to keep people from coming to this country without having their government papers in place, has led to Americans increasingly having to have real ID cards with RFID chips and biometrics on them if they even want to get on an airplane or travel to Alaska or to Hawaii. Putting these restrictions in place where if you want to get a job, you have to go through a federal clearinghouse e-verify system to make sure that your papers are correct. And yet still, there are millions of people coming here illegally, which means that in order for them to create a true fortress state that would be required to keep out people that are trying to come illegally, which would never truly happen. There would always be some bad actors and they would truly be bad actors because in order to get in, they'd have to pay big bucks to coyotes to get them in, which means that the problem with them getting in wasn't money. The problem was that they wouldn't, it would be determined that they shouldn't have come here, that they were some kind of bad actor, a cartel member, or someone fleeing, charges in their home country, pedophiles, murderers, whatever else. That would be truly who was coming here at that point. But in order to stop everyone else who's coming for good reasons, even if they don't have their government papers, there'd have to be an even more massive police state and even more restrictions on your lives and rights. Imagine a world in which every time you drive anywhere, the police can just stop you at will and demand to see your papers proving that you're from here. Or anytime you go into any large event or anything else, proving that you're allowed to be here. Anytime that you try to engage in any kind of new business, buying anything or making any large purchase like a home or a car or anything else, you'd have to go through a federal clearinghouse to make sure that you're supposed to be here. I don't think we'd want to live in the kind of Minority Report world of pre-crime that would exist in order to even effectively try to restrict migration here. Now, here are the problems and the concerns that I often hear from people who want to have restrictions on migration, and these may be yours. The three biggest ones that I hear are coming to take our jobs and to lower wages, coming to get on our welfare system, and coming to commit crimes and to be violent and to make our communities less safe.
To vote. What? I don't want people voting in our country if they're not citizens of the country.
Mine's pretty much the welfare state idea.
Okay. Yeah. So what we've seen in
an open state, you can't have both. You got to pick one or the other.
So welfare states. Go ahead.
The Democrats are trying that under this COVID. They're trying to control movement from city to city in the Democrat states.
Well, in every single state that was happening at some extent. We're about to see a return to that pretty quickly.
Not much in Utah. We're in Utah.
Oh, and in the rural states, there's been almost no reason to do what you're going to tell people that are, far apart from. You guys are 6 feet away from each other right now. What is the point of telling people in a rural situation, we got to watch where you're going? We've been socially distancing the whole time. What's the point? Yeah. But so you've seen the restrictions, and that was a taste of what it's like when you're trying to cross into the country. No, you can't come. You don't have your papers. You're not essential. We don't want you. We are, unless you are a Native American, or a black person, a descendant of African slaves, you are the descendant of people who came here who almost assuredly would not qualify to come into the U.S. legally under the current restrictions that are in place.
I think they probably think they made a mistake when they let my family in.
Well, that might be what they may have looked at you and said, we cannot allow any more of that. I'd like to address the concern. So welfare, simple solution there. Say they can't get on welfare. Make that requirement. That's much easier than creating a fortress state.
Welfare back to the churches and communities where it belongs.
And that's a whole other thing. Now, we do know from the statistics that people, immigrants that are here, both legal and illegal, are less likely to use welfare than their native-born counterparts who have similar income levels. But again, if the problem here is welfare, okay, great. We see they can't have welfare. That solves that. The problem with, where people say they're coming and they're committing violent crimes and making things less safe, and they'll do the same thing. The border control people will do the same thing that the gun control people do. They will use very sad anecdotal examples of people that are here both legally and illegally committing specific crimes, murders, and rapes and kidnappings and so forth, and say, this is proof that we need to keep these people out. Now, we know statistically.
Yeah, we know that bad things happen, but they happen regardless.
They happen regardless, and there's statistically a very significant less likelihood that people that are here either legally or illegally as immigrants are much less likely to commit crimes of violence and theft than their native-born counterparts. When it comes to the jobs thing, the problem is the impositions that are being imposed on the market by politicians and their favored cronies in order to make American labor increasingly unaffordable, so that their smaller competitors are not able to find a labor pool, and so that then the bigger competitors, can just move their base of operations on the other side of the planet to where it's cheaper to do labor, and they create relationships with dictatorships and use sweatshop slave labor and prison labor and everything else to get their wares, knowing that their smaller competitors are just stuck here out of business. But then that also makes the laborers increasingly unaffordable. That isn't the problem of the migrants. The migrants are not competing for your jobs. Most of the migrants are coming here to do work that Americans don't want to do anyway, like farm labor and things like that. They're doing low wage things, and that's the reality of that. Now, when you talk about the voting, two things there. One, you could increase the restrictions on what it takes to become a citizen, if that's the concern, is people coming to vote. Here's the other part of that, and this is a little bit of a thought exercise. People can have children, and if you're poor and you have children, then those children are reliant on the social safety net because of those impositions on the market that have been put that increasingly make people kind of force them into situations where they have to live on some form of government assistance. And so now they've had children. Those children grow up. They're already citizens, and they can vote. They might vote for more welfare because that's all they've been exposed to. They've been told that there are no real opportunities, and so they have to just live off of the state, off the taxpayer.
Now, even then, I'd be fine if we followed the 10th Amendment and let the states decide, because let's face it, at least when you deal with in your state, you have an easier means to contact your officials. Whereas when you're dealing with it federally, you're going to have a hell of a hard time even contacting your state senator,
right?
Your state Congress, or not your state, your
U.S. congressman or senator, yeah.
And but the state level, or even better yet, the county level, you can get a hold of them.
Exactly. Yeah, no, we should be, the beauty of applying the 10th Amendment as originally intended is that it decentralizes things. And I love that it says, or the people, which I would always defer to, or the people. Let the people decide it. Unless there is a vested reason that there needs to be a coercive monopoly at the top in the form of the several states that are making this decision, I say leave it to the people. Let the people come up with their own options. But in this case, again, so if people can have more children and have more welfare, then that would mean using that same logic of, we need to keep out migrants because they might end up, voting and voting for more spending and more welfare. I mean, that logic could be applied to saying that people shouldn't be able to have children up to a certain amount, especially if they're poor, because then that could lead to more voting for that. So you're allowed, because of an infringement that has been imposed and an imposition that has been imposed by an action of the state, we are now using that as a justification for further imposition on otherwise peaceful human action, having children, crossing a line and deciding to move here. That is now being made potentially a aggressive action by the virtue of the state's imposition on the market. The reason, the obvious answer there is to remove the state's imposition of the market. And the way we get rid of the welfare state isn't by telling poor people, we're taking your check, go pull yourself up by your bootstraps. When the bootstrap license costs $100,000 right now, the answer is to remove those barriers, occupational licensing barriers, various zoning and NIMBY law barriers that are mostly
cut hair for a few years while they build a nest egg to start that construction company they wanted to do.
Exactly, and not have to spend $20,000 in 2 years in school to be able to cut hair, which is where it is right now. Take all that out so that people can thrive. People can start and do what our ancestors did, what many of our ancestors did. Come here, do work, build up something, build up a nest egg, build a financial legacy that and a foundation that can be built upon. None of that's allowed anymore. If you don't already have the means to do so, you can't get ahead, and it forces you to be on that social safety net. Whether you are, the descendant of someone who's been here for, several dozen generations, or someone that literally just got here, remove those barriers, and none of this stuff will matter anymore. People can thrive without more government impositions on our daily lives, telling us what we can and can't do. Just remove those barriers and we can thrive. And the only people who would truly suffer from it are the cronies, the well-heeled mega billionaire cronies and their trillion-dollar companies who will actually have to compete with a market set free that is disrupting and creating new competitors. And that is a world, that's suffering that I don't mind seeing.
Yeah. Well, and if you go with the 10th Amendment, if, say, California wants to try their heavy social welfare net, they can try it, and their state will empty out like it is right now. And then they'll go, oh, it didn't work. Shocking, and then other states, but
states can try whatever they want. And it's the 50,
and
it's like 50 petri dishes.
Right.
Yep.
They might get one thing right. And the rest of the states can look at that and go, I like that.
Exactly.
And we can take that on, and the hair cutting. The crazy thing is I can see maybe, say a doctor, maybe not I don't know what all kind of doctors there are, but a doctor needing to go through some licensing stuff because he or she can deal with life or death or or I don't know, whatever other.
Right.
But a hair cutter, you get a bad haircut. I've been packing one around since my hair fell off the top of my head. Or my old man did auto body work, right?
Yep.
40 years doing auto body work in a little cinder block, garage that, him and his father built, and he did auto body work out of it. Well, next thing you know, the state comes down because they got lobbied by the National Auto Body Dickhead Association or whatever. I really want to curse right now. Run him out of business.
Yep.
So now, he's no longer doing what his 40 years, my whole life of doing this one profession. He run out with a little bit of ink on paper.
For no good reason other than to preserve and grow the market share of people that didn't want to compete.
He didn't know about it. It took 10 years before he even found out. He got run out of business, had a license through the city. It's so deep and thick with regulations that the city didn't even know that a regulation had been put down that needs to be,
enforced
down.
Yep. The U.S. Code of Laws combined with the various state and city code of laws, it is functionally impossible for any human being to know or memorize even a small fraction of it. And yet then police officers are put on our streets and told to enforce all the laws with less training than that hair cutter got.
Yeah.
And that's the situation we have now.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And I think you can label crimes and do it, crimes as violations. And then regulations, what if we let cities deal with that? If a city wants to lay regulations down on what works in there, let the city sink or swim on what they run out.
That's an excellent idea because like you said, if there's a chokehold that happens in the city because this one city or municipality has said that you can't do this, and people go, all right, well then I'm moving to this city over here where I can do it. That's going to be a very powerful example of being allowed to do it, of how well these laws work or don't work. And of course, they won't do it that way because it's not about protecting the public. It is about protecting well-heeled cronies who wrote that legislation. If the Fox has written a legislation that that gives him a key to the hen house, I guarantee you it's not for him to protect the hens.
No. Well, he might protect the other ones from other foxes, but
Right.
how many?
Not for long, yeah.
Because I mean, a fox would probably eat a hen a day. And so
what about the war on drugs? How would that look under a libertarian government?
It would look like something that we read about in our history books.
yeah, it looked like prohibition.
So it would be
Yeah,
like as soon as you get in, you're ending it. It wouldn't be a
deschedule the drugs, fire everyone in the DEA, refuse to hire anyone else, and put pressure on Congress to repeal the laws entirely. The war on drugs has done what prohibition did. It just like you said, what the war on what prohibition did was it created a black market, which gave criminal enterprise a powerful new way to make money. It increased rates of overdose. It increased rates of addiction. It increased rates of all of the stuff that they said would be dealt with. Spousal abuse, suicide, all of the other things that they said would be reduced. They actually went up because now people didn't want to get help because they didn't want to go to jail for having done drugs. It created a massive rift between the public and the police because now they distrusted the police because they didn't want them to know that they were off having a good time, every once in a while and having fun, going to a speakeasy. It desensitized them to the idea that they were criminals, which has continued on to this day, so that now more and more when we see police, instead of saying, oh, wow, this person's here to help us. I'm so happy that, if something bad happens, here's an officer here to protect us. Instead, we go, oh, man, am I doing something wrong? I'm sure I did something. Is my blinker on? Like, we lose it because we become desensitized from the days of, and I mean, I could go into a whole thing about hall monitors and the whole thing. We become desensitized early on and for several generations back to the idea that there's something inherently wrong with us and that they're going to find it out. And that when that happens, we're in big trouble. And that was the beginning of that. That was part of the beginning of that mentality for the American public. And it's continued on with the war on drugs. It needs to end. I am a 14-year sober recovering addict. I'm certainly not saying that doing drugs is a good idea. I certainly am not going to be doing any drugs. I am saying that the best way to solve the mental health and chronic pain and other health crises that are leading to addiction is to treat them that way instead of criminalizing people and giving cartels a powerful way to make hundreds of billions of dollars a year and to create these massive criminal enterprises that abuse and take over and destroy entire communities. All of that needs to end. The war on drugs is something that people would read about in a history book under the Jorgensen administration.
Well, I'm second generation to walk upright, and I think we've devolved because we learned
is that a family photo up there in the I guess up to your left? Yeah.
That's my other podcast. That's a self-portrait.
Okay.
We learned back then, back in the damn 20s, okay, this was a bad idea.
Yep.
Let's stop it. And they did. They brought it up and okay, it's done now, it's over. And then the states, under the 10th Amendment, got to decide what kind of alcohol laws they carried. Utah went a little aggressive with theirs. They've been loosening up slowly, but that's fine. We need to figure that out with drugs. Portugal they've done a
decriminalization. Yeah.
Let's look at what they did. They took all that money they were pouring into violence and they poured it into health.
I'm going to read a quote to you, and that's an excellent idea because even though I don't want to create new spending programs, I would much rather spend less than we're spending now on helping people instead of putting them in cages and ruining their lives. But I get what you're saying.
The spending program's already there. Hell, we would have money left over if we poured it into that. We could also drift into mental health.
Yep.
Maybe, I would have said free prostate exams, but I don't want that. But there's got to be, we could pour it into anything else.
I like that mental imagery there. I want to read you a quote from a man named John Ehrlichman, who was Richard Nixon's domestic policy chief. And he explained why the war on drugs started. He said the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew that we couldn't make it illegal to be against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin and later with crack, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. The entire purpose of the war on drugs was to criminalize people who were trying to expose the abuses of the state. And so, and the war on drugs technically started slightly before that, but that's really what this is about. It is about using...
They
go ahead.
The war on drugs to the streets. Before
exactly.
that, they were illegal, kind of dealt slightly in a justice system, but that's when they started handing it down to the police officers.
Exactly.
Well, even the name marijuana. Marijuana it's cannabis. I don't use. I drink beer. I don't
Cerveza. Yeah.
I don't
very
mess with
sensitive
drugs.
up here.
But they used the word marijuana so they could also go after the immigrants from Mexico, add them in. And I mean, at the same time, the gun laws have always been prejudiced too.
I was just about to say, so the very first gun laws in this country were passed to stop freed slaves from defending themselves against the Klan. And every single gun law that has been introduced since has been
for the Black Panthers. It was
gun laws against the Black Panthers. Every gun law has been used to disproportionately be used against communities of color, where black people are something like 4 times more likely to be in prison for a gun charge, even though white people are twice as likely to actually own a firearm. And we see it again and again. So no, gun laws are very racist. They have a racist past, and they're continuing to be used in a racist way.
And if we take away the schedule on drugs, we're going to see violence in the inner cities. Well, gun violence over territory and drugs disappear.
Exactly.
Over drugs. Now they may have to fight over all the pop-up hair salons because you'll deregulate that. But then it'll be a lot of scratches because, you know, they're hair salon ladies and they have pretty nails going on.
There's nothing to fight about if you deregulate it all.
If you deregulate it,
Yeah, just take the schedules away, you know, and then we can say, hey, we've got a safe place you can use it. And if you want counseling, that's in the same building.
Exactly. This is how they do it. Most people that are addicted to heroin, almost no one who's addicted to heroin is like, yeah, this is a great life. I love being violently ill most of the time because I'm not able to get a fix. And then when I finally get a fix, I feel like garbage, but I at least am not sick anymore and in pain. They want help. So you let them.
Also, because I got arrested and I've got this
felony record. Exactly.
So I can't get a job. So I feel depressed about my life. The old lady, she don't want to be with me because, you know, this felony and I don't have a job. And
and I'm destroying myself and my family and everything else. Instead, like you said, here's a safe place to use it. And by the way, we would love you to come over where we have free food and drinks and free rehab to help you.
Yeah. How would you?
That is spending I can get behind. And that could be done by, you know how many churches would line up around the block to be able to help people that are addicts in that way if they were allowed to?
Just want to help them out. Let's give them a chance.
Let's give them a chance. I agree 100%.
Spike, would it be appropriate for me to ask you what your struggle was? Because I would love to hear about your background in that.
What my struggle?
Your addiction.
Your addiction.
You know what? I was a really, really rebellious kid, and I was going to do drugs because I was told not to. And then it ballooned into a whole thing.
Classes, did you know?
What's that?
Went to DARE classes, did you?
And so it just became its own thing. Like it just became.
It came out that DARE classes caused more drug use.
Oh, I was a DARE kid. I used to love doing drugs with my DARE shirts on. And so, you know, it turned into a thing that was somewhat out of my control for a few years. So I was addicted for the better part of a decade, starting really young. And then back in 2006, which was also the time I stopped being a neocon. So it's interesting because I was a neocon when I was also a drug addict. So I feel like I was only a neocon because of my drug-addled state. But so 2006, I became clean, and I've been clean for 14 years now.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
I've noticed all of the ex-felon inmates I know in my family and friend group are all strong conservatives. Strong. It's crazy.
Yeah.
You would think it'd be the opposite. Maybe it's just where we're at. I mean, out here, you could line up 300 people and you might get someone who says, I know what a Democrat is. I mean, it's Republican to the core out here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I try preaching to them. There's another way. There's something different. You know, if you're angry about the government spending, there's another way. If you're angry about, you know, flag draped coffins, there's another way.
Yeah, exactly.
There is another option. And then after you go to that option, wait 6 months and you'll join me in the anarchist side. But
I like the graphic where it says, you know, libertarians early on, and it shows Kurt Russell like smiling and all happy, and this is anarchist or libertarian 6 months later, and it's him in like Escape from New York or whatever. But so I do actually need to go because I have a 9 o'clock as well.
Yeah, you go. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, folks, if you thank you so much for you know, tuning in to this. It's Tooele Happy Hour. Tooele Happy Hour. Thank you for tuning in. If you liked what you heard, I invite you to go to, and you want to hear more, I invite you to go to joj2020.com. That's joj2020.com. And we'd love to have you join the team. Come fill out our volunteer form and become a member of our team. If you're able to contribute, that would be great. In fact, we have a campaign going on right now called 38 for Spike. My 38th birthday was on Sunday. And so to celebrate my birthday, because I know now you're thinking, Spike, what can I get you for your birthday? You're such a great guy. Well, thank you so much. Go to 38forspike.com, and I ask you to make a $38 contribution to the Jorgensen Cohen campaign, or whatever amount you want. 38 is just a suggestion because it's my age. But whatever amount you can make, it would be greatly, greatly appreciated. Joe Jorgensen and I are fighting to set America free, to make America free again, and to remove the barriers and the burdens and the impositions that are keeping you from thriving, and so that the healing can begin, ending the harm and beginning the healing. And with your help and with your support and your vote this November, that is exactly what Joe and I will do. And thank you both for your time.
Can you hang on 1 minute, Spike? I want to ask you one question after we stop the live stream.
Sure, absolutely.
All right. And I'm going to stop recording.